Imagine standing on the edge of existence, your body fading away, and yet your consciousness is still very much alive. What happens to you in that moment? Where does your soul go after death? And more importantly, where does it come from? These questions, as ancient as human civilization itself, have been pondered by mystics, philosophers, and spiritual seekers for millennia. Today, we're diving into one of the most enigmatic and profound texts ever written, a text that claims to hold the answers to life, death, and the unknown realms in between. This is the story of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, known in Tibetan as Bardo Thodol, meaning liberation through hearing in the Bardo. This text is not simply a guide for the afterlife. It's an exploration of the very nature of consciousness, existence, and what lies beyond. But what exactly is the Bardo, and how can this ancient Tibetan manuscript provide answers that transcend time, culture, and religious boundaries? If death is inevitable, then perhaps we should learn how to face it with awareness. What if we could prepare for it, just as we prepare for the most important journey of our lives? The Tibetan Book of the Dead is often regarded as a mystical and esoteric text, and for good reason. Written by Padmasambhava, an Indian master who helped bring Buddhism to Tibet, it serves as a spiritual guide for the dead, or more accurately, for the consciousness of the dead as it travels through the realms beyond the physical world. Padmasambhava's teachings were compiled into this text to prepare souls for the journey through the Bardo, a liminal state that lies between death and rebirth. But what is this Bardo? In Tibetan Buddhism, the term refers to the space or experience that the soul inhabits between death and the next reincarnation. It is not simply an empty void, but a state where the consciousness is profoundly altered, influenced by the karma accumulated in previous lifetimes. The Tibetan Book of the Dead serves as a manual that describes the stages of this journey, offering guidance on how to navigate through the visions, illusions, and challenges that the soul encounters after death. However, what truly makes this text fascinating is its dual purpose. It's not just for the deceased, it's also for the living. In fact, the Tibetan Book of the Dead teaches us how to live more consciously by preparing us for death. Its teachings encourage us to cultivate awareness and mindfulness throughout our lives so that when the moment of death arrives, we can face it with clarity rather than fear. After all, death is not the end. It's just another stage in the cycle of life. To understand the Tibetan Book of the Dead fully, we must first understand the concept of the Bardo. The text divides the journey after death into three main Bardos, each representing a distinct phase of the soul's experience. These are the Bardo of the moment of death, the Bardo of the luminous state, and the Bardo of becoming. The Bardo of the moment of death. This phase begins at the moment of death when the individual's consciousness separates from the body. The soul is said to experience an intense shock, similar to awakening from a dream, but much more profound. The moment the breath ceases, the individual enters a state where they must recognize that they are no longer connected to their physical form. The Tibetan Book of the Dead teaches that the soul should not panic in this moment, but instead embrace the transition. It is a crucial time to recognize the impermanence of the body and the continuity of consciousness. The Bardo of the luminous state. Once the soul passes through the initial shock of death, it enters what is described as the luminous state. In this stage, the consciousness is freed from the constraints of the physical world and is surrounded by intense, radiant light. The text explains that during this phase, the deceased encounters visions, deities, and sometimes terrifying entities, which reflect the mind's inner experiences. These experiences are not external. They are projections of the mind's attachments, fears, and desires. In this state, the soul has the opportunity to achieve liberation if it recognizes the true nature of these visions and the emptiness of the ego, the bardo of becoming. If the soul fails to recognize its true nature during the luminous state, it enters the bardo of becoming. This stage represents the final phase before the soul is reborn. Here, the consciousness is drawn to various possible rebirths based on the karma of past lives. The soul is presented with different forms, realms, and experiences, and must make a choice about its next incarnation. If the soul is not mindful, it can easily be trapped in the cycle of rebirth, continuing its suffering. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Tibetan Book of the Dead is the role of the spiritual guide, often a Lama, in assisting the soul through these stages. In Tibetan tradition, it is believed that the deceased may still hear the recitations of the Lama during the Bardo. The Lama's voice serves as a beacon of clarity, providing instructions and reminders to help the deceased recognize their true nature and attain liberation. During the Bardo, the soul is presented with multiple challenges, both psychological and spiritual. The visions and deities encountered in the luminous state may appear overwhelming or even terrifying. However, these are seen as manifestations of the mind, not external forces. The Lama's guidance serves to help the soul navigate these challenges, encouraging it to stay calm, avoid attachment to the illusions, and ultimately realize its potential for enlightenment. The Tibetan Book of the Dead teaches that the soul is not passive in this journey. Instead, the consciousness is an active participant in creating the experiences it encounters. This understanding shifts the narrative of death from a passive event to a dynamic process where the individual's awareness and spiritual preparation can influence their experience. While the Tibetan Book of the Dead is often thought of as a guide for the dying, its teachings are deeply relevant for the living as well. In fact, one of the key messages of the text is that by living with awareness, we can better prepare for the inevitable moment of death. This preparation involves meditation, mindfulness, and contemplation of impermanence. Through regular meditation practices, we can cultivate the ability to face death without fear. The text teaches that attachment to the physical world, desires, and ego are the root causes of suffering. By practicing mindfulness and detachment, we begin to see the world with clearer eyes, recognizing the fleeting nature of all things. In this way, we can transform our relationship with death, seeing it not as a terrifying end, but as a natural part of life's cycle. Moreover, by contemplating death regularly, we can also deepen our appreciation for life. The Tibetan Book of the Dead reminds us that death is not something to be feared, but something to be embraced as an integral part of the human experience. By cultivating awareness and letting go of fear, we can live more fully, with a greater sense of peace and understanding. Although the Tibetan Book of the Dead was written over 1,000 years ago, its teachings have resonated with modern thinkers, psychologists, and spiritual seekers around the world. In the West, the text has been studied by figures like Carl Jung, who saw parallels between its teachings and his own psychological theories. Jung believed that the stages of the Bardo mirrored the processes of transformation that occur in the human psyche, making the text a profound tool for self-exploration. Other modern thinkers, such as Timothy Leary, have drawn on the Tibetan Book of the Dead in their exploration of consciousness, death, and the afterlife. For these thinkers, the text offers not just a roadmap for the afterlife, but a way to understand the deeper aspects of human consciousness and the mysteries of existence. In the end, the Tibetan Book of the Dead is much more than a guide for the dying. It's a map for navigating life itself. Through its teachings, we are invited to explore the profound mysteries of existence, life, death, and everything in between. By understanding the nature of the Bardo and the impermanence of life, we can cultivate greater awareness, live with more purpose, and ultimately face the inevitable moment of death with peace and clarity. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of the most profound spiritual texts ever written. If you found this video enlightening, don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into ancient wisdom and timeless truths. Let me know in the comments what aspects of the Tibetan Book of the Dead you'd like to explore further, and I'll see you in the next video.